In a cave where the only exit seems to be a hole in the sky, sunlight illuminates buildings resembling houses, and stairs carved into the walls of the cave lead ominously to the bottom of what seemed to be an endless pit, and at the bottom sat an ominous building. Outside the building we see a young man mashing together a paste of some kind using a mortar and pestle. The young girl was sat beside him, and despite the warnings of the young man, the girl suddenly dipped her finger into the mortar and pestle. Then she licked her finger and delighted in how delicious it tasted. The taste reminded her of candy. The young man, Lai Huoeng, pushed the girl away violently and she stumbled backward, turning the eyes of the other workers. Then he informed her that he wasn't making candy but medicinal paste. However, he quickly realized that his words were not getting through to the girl as she lay on the floor in a trance-like state. He had grown accustomed to this kind of thing. Everyone here resembled beggars, but that wasn't just because of the shabby clothes they were wearing. He has encountered some crazy people, some fools, and others who don't even resemble a human being. Even though he wore the same kind of shabby clothing, he felt so out of place, like someone took him and placed him in a museum for freaks. He started pondering why he was here, but this was quickly interrupted by the cries of a woman. He turned his attention in the direction of the cries for help and saw an overweight man who had pinned a young girl on the ground and had mounted her. It's been a long time since the fat man had seen a woman so pretty, so he begged the young girl to play with him. He promised that it would only be for a little bit. The other workers all suddenly started laughing in unison, and their eerie laughter echoing throughout the cave caused the young girl to start sobbing as she pleaded to the fat man. Huoeng turned his attention away and he returned to mashing the medicinal paste in the mortar and pestle. He recited to himself that everything he is experiencing right now is fake, everything is all an illusion. However, his body suddenly acted on its own. He jumped at the fat man and bashed him on the side of the head with the pestle. While the man was disoriented, Huoeng quickly positioned himself in between the man and the young girl. After gathering himself, the man shouted at Huoeng asking why he was trying to be self-righteous. He assured him that the master wouldn't like the fact that one of his workers got injured. Huoeng sneered at the man. What does it matter how the master feels? That bastard is insignificant to me. The man couldn't believe it, and as what Huoeng just said registered, all the mashing of the mortar and pestle stopped. Everything went silent and everyone turned their attention to Huoeng in disbelief. Suddenly footsteps were heard approaching, and a voice echoed asking if everyone was done arguing. A man wearing a clean white robe called for disciple Lai, the young girl who was bothering Huoeng earlier, and Huoeng. The man continued by saying that the master had called these two disciples. The fat man started laughing. It is common knowledge that those who are called by the master never return, and the fat man was laughing because it seemed today was Huoeng's and Lai's turn. Huoeng ignored him, and he turned toward the man wearing the white robe. However, before he could take a step, the young girl he just saved grabbed his dirty robe, asking him not to go. Huoeng brushed her arm away, and he followed Lai and the man. As they made their way through a secret passageway, the young girl looked on anxiously. Outside the building, Huoeng thought to himself as his eyes adjusted to the bright light. He thought back on what just happened, and why he suddenly got angry on behalf of the young girl. He felt uneasy because this wasn't his usual self and he couldn't let things like that start affecting his personality. He took a deep breath and as he wasn't his usual self back there. As he was calming himself down by practicing a breathing exercise, Lai tried sneaking something into his pockets. However, he caught her in the act. Lai exposed her hands, and in a trance-like manner of speaking, she asked Huoeng if he wanted some candy. After a brief silence, Huoeng decided to take the candy out of Lai's hands. Lai seemed grateful that Huoeng accepted her gift. With a smile, she started licking her fingers and singing praises for the master. She says the master is a great person for giving them delicious candy. The scene then shifts and we see Huoeng and Lai inside a cave illuminated by a reddish glow. As they walk, Huoeng looks around noticing a giant cauldron. The cauldron is massive, almost reaching the ceiling. Huoeng and Lai walked past the cauldron and into a little opening on the side of the wall. Inside, as they approached, the master, who was mashing together the same medicinal paste using a giant mortar and pestle, waited for the two with his back facing the entrance. Lai brought her hands together and she bowed, alerting the master by greeting him. The master turned with an eerie smile, asking why his precious disciples kept him waiting. Suddenly he jumped in the air, flipping and landing behind Lai. Then he grabbed her by the neck and he threw her into the giant mortar and pestle. He jumped onto the mortar and pestle laughing like a maniac. The ignorant Lai lay in the medicinal paste comfortably. She moved around in the medicinal paste, questioning if she was in sugary syrup. In her mind, the master was trying to reward her, so she thanked him, saying he was the best master they could have asked for. The master suddenly started chanting something. By Chan, my life extends, my spirits are defended by Jiazi, my body is shielded by Jiaxu, I am preserved by Jiashen, and my fate is sealed. Afterward, he struck Lai with the giant pestle, and he started mashing her body parts together with medicinal paste. The master continued his chant as he mashed together the contents inside the mortar and pestle. By Jiawu my soul found refuge. By Jiachin my true spirit was revealed. After finishing his chant, Lai's body part was fully integrated into the medicinal paste, and it was time to make some condensed pills. He shouted, "Fire up the cauldron." Huang, who was in a daze, stood there in disbelief as the wind from the cauldron being fired up blew his hair back. Two weird-looking individuals, who were wearing the same clothing as the man who brought Huang and Lai to the master, came and took the mortar and pestle from the master, and they carried it to a cliff leading down to an opening on the top of the cauldron. From the cliff, they poured the contents into the cauldron. Huang started to panic. His heart was pounding and he was sweating bullets. He frantically recited to himself that this was fake. The smell filling the room was fake, and this person in front of him was fake too. The master indulged in the smell coming from the cauldron. He blissfully took a big whiff, and then he remarked that one of his disciples informed him that Huang called a Taoist master like himself insignificant. However, he considers himself a kind master, so he is willing to give Huang the benefit of the doubt. He turned around asking Huang if the report was true. Huang remained silent and frantically recited to himself, "Even the voices I was hearing right now were fake." Huang's silence agitated the master. He jumped at him shouting, "Answer me." As the master got closer, Huang closed his eyes, reciting, "This is fake, this is fake." And as the master's hand was about to make contact with his face, he opened his eyes to the beeping of a machine. He was restrained, however he felt relieved. Everything had indeed been a hallucination. A short while later a doctor came in to let Huang out of his restraints, and after turning the beeping machine off, the doctor, Dr. Lee, pulled out an iPad and informed Huang that just like usual he would be asking him some questions about his hallucination. He asked Huang how he felt about the illusion this time, and if there was anything different or if something new happened. Huang stayed silent for a moment, then he explained that the environment was the same and he was doing the same thing as the other times he had the hallucination. It's just... He suddenly stopped talking, which made the doctor curious. He inquired about what happened this time, and after a brief pause, Huang asked if he ever told the doctor about disciple Lai. The doctor looked through his notes on his iPad. Afterwards, he shook his head notioning that Huang had never made mention of this person. Huang explained that it didn't matter too much because the balding master he mentioned last time killed this person right in front of him, and then after mashing her body into the medicinal paste, he refined it into pills using a giant cauldron. The doctor took a moment to quickly write down what Huang just said on his iPad, and Huang, who was still out of it, had many questions about what was happening to him. He stared at his hand and asked the doctor if he could tell him the meaning of all these illusions. He wanted to know if all of his hallucinations had some kind of meaning. After noting down Huang's episode on his iPad, the doctor stood up saying no. He told Huang that he doesn't need to care about such things and that he should be more concerned about the length of each illusion, as well as his mental stability. Huang went silent, and the doctor fixed his glasses, and as he turned around he praised Huang for the strides he was making. He reminded him that he was now free of HPPS, and he told him to always remember his accomplishments. The doctor made his way to the door, but before stepping out of the room he remembered something. He reminded Huang that since they didn't know what would happen if he died in the hallucination, he should act according to the plot over there every time he falls into the illusion. That way there wouldn't be any abnormalities. This is best if he wants to get discharged from the hospital as quickly as possible. As he was walking out of the room he met a young girl at the door. The young girl entered the room with a smile, asking the distracted Huang if he was paying attention to what the doctor just said. Huang turned his attention to her, and his childhood sweetheart Yang Na asked him to listen to the doctors obediently. As she approached carrying a bag, Huang's depressed face lightened up as he realized who this person was. He called out to her. Yang pulled up a chair, and she sat beside the hospital bed. Afterwards she looked up and pointed out that Huang's smile was ugly. However, Huang didn't care. He started chuckling blissfully. Yang started searching through her bag as she brought something for Huang. After finding what she was looking for, she showed it to him with a smile. These were the review materials personally assigned by the teachers. Huang's blissful expression quickly disappeared. He asked Yang if this was her way to get him back for all those times he beat her in the games they played when they were kids. Yang smacked him on the head with the book, saying of course not. Then she showed him a switch, saying if she wouldn't have brought it. Huang quickly reached for the switch. However, Yang quickly pulled her hand away, telling Huang that she would only give it to him if he called her big sister. Huang whispered in her ear, "Big sister," stunning her, and in her daze, he quickly grabbed hold of the switch. After taking the switch he laid down on the bed and started playing a game. He thanked her, saying she doesn't know how boring it's been for him to stay in a mental hospital every day. He added that even if he wasn't crazy, because of how suffocating it is, he would have ended up going crazy if she hadn't brought him some form of entertainment. Yang smiled. She told Huang to limit the hours he played the game and to do his homework. She reminded him of the promise he made. Huoing suddenly sat up in the bed saying he wouldn't forget. He grabbed her shoulders gently, and he brought his head close to hers saying he hadn't forgotten that they promised to go to the same college. Afterwards he hugged her, and as they shared a moment he promised that he would recover from whatever this is. Yang asked him to get well soon because she was waiting for him. Sometime later Yang started preparing to leave. It was getting late, so Huoing used that as an excuse to get out of bed and walk her to the hospital gate. However, as he was putting on his slippers, he suddenly felt dizzy and he started hearing voices in his head. He felt weak, so he held onto the table beside the bed, and as he tried to gather himself, he noticed that the tray on the table had suddenly transformed into the mortar and pestle from his hallucination. He started to panic. Yang became concerned. She grabbed his hand and did her best to help him keep his balance. She asked him if he was okay and if there was a need to notify Dr. Lee. Huoing was distracted by his thoughts. There was no way the mortar and pestle from his hallucinations could be in the real world. But then why was it here, he questioned. He has been following the doctor's orders these past few days as well, so it makes no sense for this to be happening. He took a quick pause, then after calming himself, he played this episode as a joke so Yang wouldn't be concerned. Yang pouted. She asked Huoing why he was still acting like a child, and then she walked off. Huoing quickly turned to the table, and the tray was back to normal. After confirming that he was seeing things, he chased after Yang. Outside we see Huoing walking behind Yang, asking her not to be angry at him as he just wanted to lighten the situation. Again he asked her not to be mad, but she wasn't answering. He tried to get a look at her face to see if she was mad at him. However, Yang suddenly turned and tapped him on the lips, and with a smile, she told him that she would come to see him again next week, so he should take care of himself while he was here. Huoing smiled, saying he would. The two waved goodbye to each other and Huoing started heading back to his room. As he walked he thought about what happened in the room. He was convinced that he saw the mortar and pestle. This made him question if his condition had somehow worsened. If his condition worsens, then he won't be able to leave the hospital before the college exams, and if that happens he won't be able to take the same university entrance exam as Yang. He lifted his hands in the air and shouted in frustration. However, there was nothing he could do, so he decided to trust in the doctor as he was the best doctor his father could find. Suddenly something appeared in his pocket. He reached into his pockets in shock, questioning what it could be. He pulled out what seemed to be the candy syrup that Lai gave him. This made him paranoid. He decided to taste the candy to confirm if it was the candy syrup from his hallucinations. As he did this, he was hesitant to face the fact that something from his hallucinations appeared in reality. After tasting the candy, he suddenly started running to tell Dr. Lee about this development. However, he stopped halfway through. Something came to mind, and with a devilish smile, he realized that this was a big opportunity for him as there was more than just candy syrup in his hallucinations. Back inside the hallucination, Huoing addressed the other workers, asking if any of them had money. The other workers didn't seem to understand, so Huoing instead asked them if they had gold, silver, or a jade pendant he could borrow. He comments that they have no use for those items here, so they might as well let him borrow it for a short while. But this just further confused the other workers. Frustrated, Huoing decided to let it go as there was no way drug addicts could have valuables like gold and silver. Suddenly someone called out to him. It was the girl he saved. She asked him to come with her for a second. Huoing followed her, and a short while later we saw the two in one corner of the cave away from the eyes of the other workers. The young girl took off her shoes, revealing a golden anklet around her left ankle. She took it off and showed it to Huoing, asking if it'll be enough. Huoing knelt and took the anklet, and he started observing it. The anklet was thin, but it was pretty heavy. He guessed that that must be because it was made out of gold. He put the anklet inside his robe, commenting that it was pretty good. He asked if he could borrow the anklet, and assured her that he would return it later, and in exchange for letting him borrow the anklet, he gave her a candy cane, and the young girl who viewed him as her hero thanked him. The other workers, who had followed the two in hopes of seeing something entertaining, walked out of their hiding spots in disappointment. Suddenly, as the workers voiced their disappointment, the man in a white robe, who had come for Huoing and Lai earlier, made his presence known, asking what the workers were doing. His voice struck fear into the workers, and in an intimidating tone, he ordered them all to get back to work. The other workers quickly scurried back to their mortar and pestle. The man noticed Huoing in the crowd of people as they hurried back to their stations. He called out to him, saying it was unfortunate that he couldn't be used as a medicinal ingredient for the master. Huoing glared at him. Through some digging he was able to learn this person's name. It was Xuan Yang. Xuan turned his back to the workers, asking them to get back to work. He reminded them that if they don't get the master's medicine right, they will be skinned alive. As Xuan turned, Huoing noticed a jade pendant swinging by his side. The pendant looks like an antique, which brought a smile to his face, and he planned to take it for his own. In the dead of night, at 3 a.m., outside Xuan Yang's residence, we see Huoing walking out of the door with the pendant in hand. He didn't think things would go this smoothly. It turns out that Xuan isn't in his residence tonight. He held out his arm and stared at the pendant. If he can somehow take this out to the real world and sell it, it should be able to take care of his and Yang's college tuition fees. He started making his way back to the bottom of the cave, singing about the pendant. However, on the stairs in front, a little bit further down, he noticed bright lights. Fearful of what it could be, he stopped his track down the stairs and called out, "Is anyone there?" Xuan suddenly appeared behind him asking what he was doing awake at this hour of the night, and what he was doing here of all places. Huoing couldn't respond, he froze because of fear. After regaining his composure, Huoing jumped back, putting some space between him and Xuan. He feared that Xuan would do something to him. Then he noticed that Xuan wasn't wearing his elegant white robe and was instead wearing the same shabby clothes as the medicine servants who spent all day working with a mortar and pestle to make medicinal paste for the master. He asked Xuan why he changed into the clothing meant for the medicinal paste workers. However, Xuan didn't give him an answer. Annoyed, he comments that Huoing is lucky. Then he proceeds to grab him by his collar and drags him further down the stairs where 3 other senior disciples are waiting with candles in hand. The other disciples asked Xuan why he was bringing one of the workers along, and Xuan told them that he was bringing Huoing along because he accidentally discovered their plans to escape this wretched place. He didn't feel like killing him, so he decided to bring him along. The words of the doctor telling him to act according to the plot in his hallucinations played in Huoing's head. Plus, he hasn't confirmed if he could bring things from his hallucinations into the real world, so he interjected by asking if Xuan and the others were planning to run away. He protested, saying he doesn't want to join them. Xuan assured Huoing that he had nothing to worry about as the other guards had already been dealt with. However, Huoing still resisted. He questioned why they, as senior brothers, were trying to run away. This irritated Xuan, and he slammed Huoing into the wall of the cave, exclaiming that he took a big risk trying to bring him along. However, if Huoing didn't want to tag along, then he wouldn't force him. He continued, saying that there was no way he could let Huoing live after discovering their plans. This plot twist gave Huoing a headache, and since every time he returned to reality the NPC hadn't been able to lay a finger on him, he decided to slip back into reality. He closed his eyes, and he reminded himself that this was all an illusion. He opened his eyes, and as he expected, he was back inside the hospital. However, he was in his restraints. After struggling to free himself, he gave up and laid down. At this time in the night the nurses are all asleep, so there's no way for him to call for someone to set him free, meaning there is no way for him to check if he brought the jade pendant and the golden anklet out of the illusion. Frustrated, Huoing decided to slip back into the hallucination and check on the treasures he had with him later. He slipped back into the hallucination, and after gaining consciousness he looked around, noticing that Xuan and the other senior brothers who were planning to escape were nowhere to be seen. He guessed that they must have left already. This brought a smile to his face. As he guessed earlier, there is no way his hallucinations would be able to hurt him, meaning he can abuse the shit out of this. The next day, someone came running to the medicinal paste workshop, shouting at the top of his lungs to wake everyone up. It was one of the senior disciples, and he was shouting as he ran that the master had ordered everyone to gather at the Huian Hall. The other workers sat up from their straw beds nervously, questioning what could cause the master to suddenly order them to gather. And since the situation seemed serious, they moved quickly to not get in trouble for being late. However, with his newfound confidence from discovering how to abuse his hallucinations, Huoing lay there staring at the ceiling as the others scurried around. Sometime later at Huian Hall of Qingfeng Temple, everyone had gathered, and shortly after the master stepped out of Qingfeng Temple, asking if everyone had gathered as he ordered. The look on the master's face was concerning to Huoing. He thought to himself, pondering what the old geezer was up to. The master walked out of the temple carrying a rope, and as he walked he explained that last night at 3 o'clock, some people tried to escape. Among them were 2 of his disciples, who he held in high regard. He walked past the other workers, dragging the 4 disciples, who had been tied up, saying his disciples had deeply hurt their master. The master planned on using this spectacle to serve as a reminder to the workers that the rules of the Zishan Donghua sect, which were made clear, are as previously stated, rewards for merit, punishment for transgressions, and these rules apply to everyone, even the personal disciples of the master. The master dragged Xuan and the others past Huoing, and Xuan shot Huoing a look. It seemed like he was trying to ask for help. However, he couldn't get a word off due to his mouth being gagged. Huoing glared at him. Even if he wasn't gagged, from the look in his eyes it was obvious that he wouldn't be lending them a helping hand. He felt nothing as he watched the master drag Xuan along. The master suddenly tossed the 4 in the air, then using his martial powers he opened a giant hole in the ground, and he tossed the 4 in. Suddenly all the confidence Huoing felt earlier disappeared as he remembered that he was with Xuan and the other 3 as they planned their escape. He started sweating nervously, and to calm himself down, he repeated to himself that this was all a hallucination, and everything in this hallucination is created by him, so he has nothing to fear. However, the screams coming from the floor as they neared the bottom of the pit that the master created sounded very real, and it shook Huoeng to his core. Suddenly, a tentacle shot out from the pit and killed the man standing next to Huoeng. Seeing someone die so gruesomely in front of him shook his confidence further. He, along with the others, couldn't bring themselves to face the pit in fear of what monstrosity they would see. The master levitated in the air with the creature standing menacingly behind him. Huoeng caught a glimpse of the creature, and he nervously questioned how messed up his head had to be to create something like that, even if it was just an illusion. The only thought that could bring him comfort was the thought that things from his hallucination couldn't hurt him. However, he was still nervous as something like this had never happened before. The master moved through the air above the other workers, asking anyone who had evil intentions as those four did to remember what they saw today. After landing on the ground, he continued saying that helping someone become immortal is a great merit, and should he ascend to immortality, he will never forget their kindness. As he walked past Huoeng, he turned his gaze towards him. He knows that Huoeng was in contact with the four traitors and that they invited him to join them in their plans to escape. However, Huoeng didn't go, so the master wanted to know why. Huoeng couldn't respond, fear gripped him, and all he could do was comfort himself with the thought of all this being an illusion. The master, along with the other things that are happening, he thought to himself that they are all his illusions, figments of his imagination, so he has no reason to be afraid. The master patted Huoeng on the head and praised him for his loyalty, and as he walked away he commented that he thinks Huoeng has talent, so from now on he will become his official disciple, and his new job is managing the supply room. Huoeng questioned the intentions behind his promotion, and he guessed that he wasn't promoted because of talent as the master said, but because too many people had died and he didn't have enough help. The master also addressed the matter of Huoeng not having a Taoist name, and since he's become his disciple he cannot let him continue without a Taoist name. He changed Huoeng's name to Xuanyang, and he announced to the others that from now on Huoeng's Daoist name will be Xuanyang. Huoeng couldn't help but chuckle. He felt as if the name was a warning of sorts to keep him in line, to serve as a reminder that he was replaceable, just like the last Xuanyang. Next, the master threw him a pouch, and Huoeng caught the pouch, questioning what it could be. The master explained that inside the pouch were 5 immortal elixir pills that he refined. Consuming it will add 10 years to one's life, and it will also increase one's strength. The master started approaching the entrance to the temple. As he walked past the other workers, he started laughing out loud, and he spoke directly to the others, asking them to take note of what happened today. He continued saying that going against him means death. However, anyone who helps him will be rewarded just like how Huoeng was, and he assured them that there are lots of rewards. Huoeng froze as he stared at the pills in his hands. He thought back to a few days ago when he witnessed Disciple Lai being integrated into the medicinal paste. This made him wonder if these pills that the master gave him could have been refined using a human. The next morning, after slipping out of the hallucination, Huoeng laid out the jade pendant, the anklet, and the 5 immortal elixir pills the master gave him on the hospital bed. He couldn't believe that he was able to bring things from his illusions into the real world. But before he started rejoicing, he wanted to verify the authenticity of the jade pendant and the gold anklet. Then a thought came to mind. He turned his attention to the pouch containing the 5 immortal elixir pills. If the gold anklet and the jade pendant turned out to be real, he pondered if that meant the elixir pills would have the effects the master described. He decided to try one of the pills. However, as he reached forth his hand to grab one of the pills, Yang slammed the door open, shouting his name. She informed him that she was skipping class and even jumped over the hospital gate to come and see him, so this better be something important. Huoeng quickly made his way over to the door, and before closing it, he looked out into the hallway to make sure Yang wasn't followed. As Yang went on about what she would do if this was some kind of prank, Huoeng went around the room, closing all the windows and curtains. Yang got flustered, her mind went to the gutters, and she started blushing. She asked Huoeng why he was going around closing curtains, and if he wanted to do what she thought he wanted to do. She reminded him that the nurses' station would still be able to hear them. Using the intercom, one of the nurses started laughing at the two. She teased them, saying they couldn't hear anything at the nurses' station, and she urged Huoeng to hurry up and make a move. After making sure the room was secure, Huoeng handed something to Yang, and he asked the nurse to stop being so nosy and to focus her attention on the ICU. Yang stared at the jade pendant that Huoeng handed her, questioning what it was. Huoeng whispered, asking her to keep her voice down and to listen closely to what he was about to say. He whispered something in Yang's ear, and a few days later, we saw Huoeng sitting in his hospital room patiently. Ever since he started having these hallucinations, everyone, including his parents, didn't believe him. They all thought he was crazy. However, Yang was different. She was his savior, and she was the only one who was willing to listen to him. So he hoped that she would continue to believe in him and carry out what he asked her to. Shortly after, the same nurse from a few days ago called Huoyang's name using the intercom, and after getting his attention she teased him, saying his girlfriend was here to see him again. Huoyang couldn't contain his excitement. He shouted Yang's name and quickly made his way to the hallway, as he thought Yang was the only person he could trust, and as he opened the door he was met with security guards walking by. Curious, he asked one of the guards, Zhao, if something happened. Zhao told him to go back into his room and close the door, and he warned him about exiting his room so casually. As he walked away, he waved goodbye and asked Huoyang to report it if he saw old Liu as he was sneaking around and spreading his medicine again. Huoyang assured that he would make a report if he saw old Liu. He was a bit concerned that old man managed to escape from the critical ward, and he pondered how such a frail old man managed to do it. However, now wasn't the time for that, and it wasn't any of his business. There was also no way he could heed Zhao's warning as Yang was here. He closed his hospital door and made his way outside. A short while later, in a quiet corner, away from prying eyes, Yang and Huoyang met up. Yang had someone appraise the jade pendant and the gold anklet Huoyang gave to her, and it turns out, just like he said the day he handed her the items and asked her to get them appraised. The jade pendant is an authentic antique. Its estimated value is no less than 400,000 yuan, and the gold anklet turned out to be real as well. Huoyang started laughing, saying he thought this would be the case. As reality distorted around him, he fixed his hair, saying he knew he wasn't crazy. He picked Yang up, and reality continued to distort further. He lifted her in the air, telling her that he knew he wasn't crazy. The scene then shifts and we see Huoyang escorting Yang to the gate. It seems, despite what everyone thought his ability was the real deal, and he made a joke that he shouldn't get cured too quickly so he could milk his ability. He asked Yang if she was ready to become a rich lady living in an extravagant mansion. Yang punched him in the side of his stomach, and she asked him to stop spouting nonsense. She doesn't want money, especially if it comes at the cost of his health. His health was more important to her than some weird ability, so she asked him to promise that because of this discovery, he wouldn't stop his treatment and would continue to take his medicine. She told him that if he didn't continue his treatment then she would no longer be helping him out. Huoyang was taken aback. The air of arrogance he had earlier disappeared, and he took a moment to ground himself. Afterward, he promised that he would continue his treatment. As he said this, a silhouette of a man suddenly appeared behind the two. The man attacked Yang, and before Huoyang even realized what was going on, the man, old Liu, had pinned Yang on the ground. Huoyang shouted old Liu's name, then he charged at him, shouting and pleading for old Liu to let Yang go. However, before he could get close, old Liu threw something at him, knocking him to the ground. As his consciousness faded, Huoyang turned his gaze towards Yang, and he begged old Liu to stop. Then he thought back to the master from his hallucinations, and the memory of the master explaining the effects of the pills started playing in his head. Yang was doing her best to fight off old Liu, and with tears streaming down her face, she called out to Huoyang asking if he was alright. However, when she looked in his direction, she noticed that something was off about Huoyang. In the reflection in her eyes, we see Huoyang quickly eating something, and afterward, he suddenly stands up, giving off an intimidating aura. He was overflowing with energy, and his body was emitting a reddish glow. He jumped at old Liu, and before old Liu could even react, he closed the distance between them in an instant. He grabbed old Liu by the face, then slammed his face into the ground, and reminded him that he warned him to stop. He asked old Liu if he was hard of hearing because of his old age. A short while later, after this incident, Huoyang was quickly surrounded by guards and was put in restraints. Huoyang, who was starting to calm down, decided to let the guards restrain him. He was dragged to the dangerous patient confinement room by the guards, where, unlike his usual restraints, he was strapped to a wall, and he was chained up for added security. A short while later, Huoyang started fighting to free himself from the restraints but failed to do so. He started shouting and begging for the guards to let him go. He desperately pleaded his case, saying he wasn't the one who started it, and that he was only fighting back. Dr. Li entered the confinement room and he stood in front of him. Huoyang continued pleading his case. He told Dr. Li everything that went on. He explained that he and Yang were just chilling when old Liu attacked them. He added that he had no choice. Dr. Li nodded, noting that he already knew the story. However, this confused Huoyang, and he pondered why he was the one in chains instead of old Liu. Dr. Li fixed his glasses, explaining that what Huoyang did couldn't be considered fighting back. It seemed more like he was trying to get payback with how much he enjoyed it. His tone suddenly shifted, and he asked Huoyang in a cold, commanding tone to be honest with him. There's no way a regular person would be able to hurt another person that much, and he asked him to explain how he suddenly got that surge of strength. Huoyang looked to the side, trying his best to avoid the topic. He seemed to want to say something, however, he didn't know what to tell Dr. Li. He couldn't exactly say that he took a medicine he got from the master in his hallucinations which increased his strength. However, the doctor pressed him about the question. He told Huoing to think carefully about lying to him, and he continued with a warning, saying he is the type of doctor who hates it when his patients lie to him. Huoing didn't know what to do. He knew that if he told the doctor about the pills, the doctor would bombard him with further questions, and it would make it difficult for him to get discharged from the hospital. Since he felt cornered, and no good explanation was coming to mind, he decided to slip into the hallucination. He started closing his eyes. To Dr. Lee, it appeared as if Huoing was becoming unresponsive. He became concerned and walked closer. Then he placed his hands on Huoing's forehead, measuring his temperature, and he called his name. Huoing was able to successfully slip into the hallucination. He was in the room meant for the workers, and inside the cold dark cave he laid on his bed made of straws with a smile. He lifted his hands towards the ceiling and clenched his fist. As he lay there he felt a sense of relief. Sometime later, inside a secluded room, Huoing's coronation for becoming the master's disciple was about to begin. After the other disciples had gathered inside the room, the master had them sit, with their legs crossed, in front of giant statues. Each statue was crafted differently and was made in the image of what seems to be Taoist masters. Huoing observed the statues and guessed that they must be the previous Taoist masters. To start the coronation, the master approached the base of the statues, and he lit an incense, and as the smoke from the incense filled the room he paid his respect to the statues and asked them to look over his new disciple. The master chanted, "The only trinity is a microcosm of Tai Chi, ascending to inherit the mandate of a family in dire times. They were bestowed with immeasurable honors and praises, bestowing blessings, alleviating suffering, and saving all beings from crisis, crowned above all heavens, purifying the three realms." Afterward, the master called Huoing by his new name, and after getting his attention he addressed the other disciples, saying Huoing was recently appointed as a disciple, so there are a lot of things he doesn't understand yet. He called the disciple next to Huoing, saying as his senior he would be responsible for teaching Huoing their ways. The disciple brought his hands together, showing great respect for the master, and he assured that he understood. As this went on, Huoing observed the other disciples quietly, and shortly after, the master announced that it was now past 9. And the coronation was over. Since there was nothing left to do and the coronation proceeded smoothly, he dismissed them to have dinner. However, as the master walked away, Huoing noticed that one of the senior disciples, who was sitting beside the master, was watching him closely. Huoing was confused. He wondered who this disciple was and why he was looking at him. He realized that the disciple was sitting beside the master as the coronation proceeded, and he started to wonder how close this disciple was to the master for him to be allowed a spot beside him. After being dismissed, they went to the dinner hall, and afterward, they went to their sleeping quarters. The next day, Huoing met up with Wang, the disciple that was assigned to show him the ropes yesterday. As they walked together, Wang decided to start teaching Huoing how things operate for the master's disciples. He started by warning Huoing, saying the disciple that was sitting next to the master yesterday was senior brother Zhengkan, and ever since Zhengkan and Zhengjun betrayed the sect, Zhengkan is the only remaining inner disciple, so Huoing should always show Zhengkan and anyone he meets within the temple respect from now on. While waving his fingers, he continued saying that they can be petty. Huoing thanked his senior brother for the warning, but he was concerned about something else. He reminded Wang that he had just recently become the master's disciple, and he asked if there are any steps he should take next to get on the master's good side. He scratched his head, asking Wang to clarify things up for him. Wang explained that even though the master himself has taken Huoing as his disciple, he only asked him to manage the supply room, meaning if Huoing was looking forward to learning the ways of immortality, he was not even close. Huoing couldn't believe what he was hearing. He mouthed in a questioning tone, "Ways of immortality." He couldn't contain his excitement, and he grabbed Wang's shoulders, asking if the master could teach him how to become an immortal. Wang brushed Huoing's hands off of his shoulders, asking him to calm down, and explained that the master's powers are indeed formidable. But the way to become immortal is probably something only inner disciples like senior brother Zhengkan can learn. Huoing thought about becoming immortal, which caused him to smile. It seems his illusion has a lot of good stuff for the taking. However, it's becoming obvious that he will have to fight to pull even more money out of here. Sometime later, inside the Qingfeng Temple alchemy room, the master had all his disciples gather on the cliff in front of the giant cauldron. He stood at the forefront enjoying the wind from the shock wave that kept the fire underneath the cauldron going. The cauldron suddenly started emitting a whitish glow, and the master suddenly erupted into uncontrollable laughter. Using his martial powers, he opened the giant cauldron, releasing the pressure inside, and creating another shock wave that almost blew the other disciples backward. Then 5 pills levitated out of the cauldron, and as they floated above the open cauldron, they shone brightly, almost like little stars. The master took out a mystical green gourd, and as he used his martial powers he shouted, "This is good," as he sealed the pills into the gourd. Huang was taken aback. His heart was racing, but not for the reason one would expect. He realized that he had been thinking too small. Yes, money was good, but the master could do crazy stunts he had never seen before. He realized that he needed a shift in perspective, because if he could bring this ability to the real world, then he wouldn't need to worry about money. As Huang relished in the thought of what he could do with this power in the real world, the master called his name. Motivated by his previous thoughts, Huang decided to give serving the master his all so that the master would teach him how to obtain the powers he had. He brought his hands together and bowed, asking, "What can I help you with?" The master chuckled a little, then after closing the gourd, he turned to Huang, asking him to bring the herbal primer known as Biling Miao. Huang froze. He didn't know why, but the name sounded very familiar. Then it hit him. Biling Miao was the girl who he saved, and the one who gave him the golden anklet. As he recalled the kindness she showed him, he struggled to move his body. Frustrated, the master got up in his face, asking if he couldn't hear him just now. Huang didn't know what to do. He felt cornered, so he closed his eyes and faded back into reality. When he opened his eyes, Huang was out of the dangerous patient confinement room, and Dr. Li and a woman looked on with concern. They called his name in unison, and after taking a moment to gather himself, Huang became confused. He called out, asking why his mom and Dr. Li were so close in his face. Huang's mom, Lin, felt concerned for her son. She hovered her hand over his head, afraid to touch it because it was wrapped with a bandage. She asked, "What happened to your head, and why is it wrapped up like that? Did you get hurt?" Huang smiled and assured his mom that everything was fine. His mom let out a sigh of relief, and then she noticed his thin body. She commented on it and asked if he was eating well. Huang shook his head, and while digging through the things in her carry-on bag, she asked if the hospital food was bad. She took out a see-through bowl and explained to Huang that inside was some of his favorite grape milk candy. She took one out and tried to feed him. Huang was embarrassed. He told her that she didn't need to trouble herself, but as he was talking she placed the candy in his mouth. After eating the candy, Huang commented that he didn't need the candy and would have rather spent time with her since she rarely comes by to visit him. Lin closed the bowl, and with a smile, she told him that it was a good thing he woke up so suddenly because Dr. Li was about to drag her off to meet the family of the man who hit him. Dr. Li pointed out that it was already past the time Lin promised to meet old Liu's family, and he commented that they had kept them waiting for too long. Lin remarked that she knew, and she asked Dr. Li to give her a moment to say something to her son. Huang, looking remorseful, asked his mom to trust that he only fought back, and that old Liu was the one who attacked him and Yang first. Lin placed the bowl back into her carry-on bag, saying Dr. Li explained everything in fine detail of what happened that day. She grabbed her biceps and clenched her fist, and with a comforting smile, she assured him that his mommy had his back. Huang went silent. What she just said almost brought him to tears. Lin looked at the clock and decided that she had kept old Liu's family waiting long enough. As she approached the door, she waved goodbye and asked Huang to listen to Dr. Li and to take his medicine on time. She made her way to the door, and Huang called out to her, but she just exited with a ferocious look in her eyes. Huang felt comforted. He thought to himself that his mother was going to scold old Liu's family thoroughly. Suddenly his consciousness started shifting back to the hallucination. His mom showing up out of nowhere distracted him from the fact that he had to take care of that bald geezer. The doctor addressed the drowsy Huang, asking if they could continue their conversation from when he was in the dangerous patient confinement room. However, he quickly noticed that Huang's consciousness was fading, and as he slipped back to the hallucination, Huang notes that he needs to have that conversation with the doctor and makes a mental note to do it next time he slips out of the illusion. On the other side, Huang was woken up by a cold voice asking if he was awake. Confused, he opened his eyes slowly. Realizing whose voice that was, he sat up quickly and addressed the master, confirming that he was awake. Then he thought to himself, pondering if the matter of refining pills with Biling Miao had been settled already. Suddenly the master grabbed him by the mouth, and Huang accepted it. He knew that there was no way he could fight back as the master was stronger than him, and he needed the master to trust him so he could learn the ways of an immortal. The master motioned his right hand, which was grasping a black creature with tentacles, backward, and with a crazed smile, he shouted that if Huang was awake then he should be a good disciple and open his mouth. He shoved the creature in Huang's mouth. Huang shouted, and as the creature's tentacle dug further into his mouth, Huoing wondered what the master was trying to make him swallow. The master kept his right hand over Huoing's mouth, trying to force him to swallow the creature. Huoing tried to fight back, but he was easily wrestled to the ground, and the master asked him to open wide because if he didn't he wouldn't be able to swallow the black Taisui. The panel pans out and in the corner of the cave, we see a coffin plastered with ceiling totems. After a while, the master no longer needed to hold Huoing down, and the black Taisui started crawling deep down Huoing's throat. As he watched this scene, the master tried to persuade Huoing that the black Taisui was good and that as long as he swallowed it, it would suppress his hysteria, ensuring that next time his feelings won't get in the way. However, Huoing refused to eat it. Yes, he wanted power, however, he didn't want it to come at the cost of his humanity. He grabbed hold of the black Taisui and pulled it out of his mouth. The master looked on with an amused expression, and then he called for the senior disciples Changaming and Changren. Suddenly, the two disciples appeared behind Huoing, and they pinned him to the ground with their blades. The master approached slowly. He asked why Huoing was refusing to eat the black Taisui, and declared that to be his disciple he must eat the black Taisui. But this only made Huoing more skeptical. He thought to himself, wondering why the master was so determined to get him to eat the black Taisui. Feeling cornered, he closed his eyes and slipped out of the hallucination, with the master calling his name. On the other side, Huoing opened his eyes in his restraints and gasped for air. Yang, who had been watching over him, leaned over the bed and asked if he was okay and if something was hurting him. After gathering himself, Huoing looked up at Yang, but before he could answer her, Dr. Lee walked in asking if he was still struggling with the hallucinations. He comments that lately, Huoing's emotions have shown a significant increase in fluctuations. As the doctor spoke, the area around him was distorted. Seeing Yang's face almost made Huoing forget that he wasn't completely out of the hallucination yet. Huoing was feeling overwhelmed with everything that was happening in the illusion, so he asked Dr. Lee if he had any more of the medicine that temporarily suppressed the hallucinations, like the ones he was prescribed before. The doctor went silent for a moment, then he turned to face the door, saying he remembered seeing one somewhere. There might still be some left from the previous ones he prescribed, so he left to get some more. However, as he approached the door, he reminded Huoing that the medicine can only play a supportive role, and that if he wants to recover he has to follow the methods they discussed earlier. A short while later, Yang returned with the medicines and a glass of water. Since Huoing was still in his restraints, she decided to feed him the medicines. Huoing accepted the medicine, however, he felt too sick to drink the water. As he took the medicine, the space around was distorted, and the medicine looked like the black Taisui the master was trying to force him to eat. He forced himself to swallow the medicine, and instantly the distortion stopped. Feeling relief, he let out a sigh, exclaiming that he was safe now. He added that as long as he took the medicines, the hallucinations should stop. Huoing's comment about feeling safe now concerned Yang. She asked him if he could tell her about what happens in the hallucinations. Huoing chuckled, assuring Yang that it was nothing to worry about. He exclaimed that the person in his hallucination, who is considered their master, was saying he had hysteria and was trying to feed him something strange. He started laughing, saying it must all be a joke because there was no way that the character in his hallucinations was real, and that this world was the real one. However, as he said that, the black Taisui tentacle suddenly started wiggling out of his mouth, and the space around him was showing signs of distortion. This shocked Huoing. He took the medicine that always stopped the hallucinations, so he wondered why he was starting to hallucinate right now. He calmed himself down and noted that as long as he closed his eyes in the hallucination, then he should be able to return quickly. When he slipped into the illusion, he was met with the scene of the master kneeling in front of him. He looked up at the master, who had a grin on his face. The master pointed out that Huoing refused to eat the black Taisui. However, he almost swallowed his hand after it was forced down his throat. He explained that these are all signs of hysteria, and with this Huoing's hysteria should be cured, meaning he can work properly. The master stood from the ground, and as he walked away he asked Huoing to remember that the King Feng Temple does not accommodate idle people, and at the start of every month Huoing is to report to him to take his medicine. As he knelt there, Huoing started to wonder if this place could be the real one. He never thought this was a possibility, but his perception of what was real was quickly falling apart. However, he refused to accept that this could be the case. He started crawling away at his neck, refusing to accept that Yang was all an illusion. All of the scratching that he did to his neck left multiple scars, and it caused him to throw up. As he knelt there on all fours, a white figure appeared beside him, calling his name. This figure resembled Yang, and Huoing addressed her as such. He called her name and comforted himself with the thought that she didn't leave him. However, as he looked up to get a closer look, the figure started to disappear. Huoing reached forth his hand, stumbling and crawling towards the figure, shouting Yang's name. However, the figure disappeared in his grasp. After the figure disappeared, he looked up and shouted, "Why am I in this cursed place? This fucking illness still won't let me go." The scene then shifts to the medicinal paste workers area, and we see Bailing now carrying some steam buns to the corner of the cave. From afar she sees Huoling sitting in a defeated pose staring at something in his right hand. Bai approached him, and she knelt beside him. She asked him to have some of the steam buns since he hadn't eaten all day. Huoling wasn't interested in the food. His focus was on the jade pendant that Bai had returned to him. He asked her how she ended up with the pendant, and Bai explained that he gave it to her. Continuing on, she told him that she refused to take it, however he insisted. Afterwards he picked her up and swung her around, exclaiming that he knew he wasn't sick. Huoling asked her to tell him what happened after that, and she added that, afterwards the fat guy who attacked her before saw it as an opportunity to strike, and he hit Huoling in the head with a rock. As Bai described what happened, Huoling was drawing connections to the events that he thought happened in the real world. Bai continued saying that the fat man thought Huoling was dead, so he tried to attack her. Huoling sprung up asking what had happened to the fat man. Bai was slightly taken aback, and she hesitated to tell Huoling what happened. She asked him if he didn't remember, and after Huoling told her that he didn't, she told him that he killed the fat man. Huoling was confused. In the real world he only ripped old Liu's face off, but in the illusion, he actually killed the fat man. He clenched his fist, and with a cold expression on his face, he reflected. He concludes that there was probably no old Liu. He was starting to realize that he might be completely insane. The scene then shifts to inside the giant cauldron room, and Huoling enters the scene of the other senior disciples washing the giant cauldron. The water was filling the room, and as he stepped through the flooded room, approaching the master, his mind was racing with thoughts. This place that he thought was the illusion might be reality, which means the previous disciple he took the place of might have actually been real, and everyone else is in danger of dying. Now that there is a strong possibility that this is reality, he couldn't just look past their deaths and act as if it were nothing. It would weigh on him too much. The culprit of all this is the master, but what can he do against that monster? A short while later, Huoling stood beside the master, watching the giant cauldron getting cleaned. The master noticed that Huoling was deep in thought. He called his name, and after getting his attention he asked him if he wanted to say something. Huoling couldn't respond. This agitated the master. He glared at Huoling and ordered him to tell him what he was thinking about. Huoling brought his hands together and bowed his head, saying he was simply admiring the great path of cultivation that his wonderful master cultivates, and the reason he was so deep in thought was because he was wondering when he would reach the master's level. Senior brother Jenkins scoffed at Huoling's pathetic attempt at trying to flatter the master. The master chuckled and exclaimed that he likes the fact that Huoling has ambition, and comments that it's a good thing. Senior brother Jenkins was puzzled. He wondered if the master fell for such obvious flattery. The master added that if he could teach Huoling he would. However, the external cultivation path is not that simple. Common pills and alchemy are one thing, but to achieve immortality one must practice both internal and external cultivation. Huoling asked the master if he was about to achieve immortality. The master approached the cauldron, explaining that achieving immortality is not that simple. However, he was determined to get it done. The master asked Huoling if he was curious to know why he was so determined, and Huoling replied saying he was. Before the master could respond, senior brother Jenkins interrupted. He pointed out that it was almost midnight and that if they didn't prepare soon then they might miss the auspicious time. The master reluctantly moved on from his conversation with Huoling, and he ordered everyone to start the preparations. As they left to prepare, senior brother Jenkins looked back and asked Huoling to bring the candidate from last time. This confused Huoling, and as he stood there in a daze, senior brother Jenkins got in his face and tapped his chest. In an agitated tone, he asked Huoling to bring the white-haired candidate that he was supposed to bring the previous day when his hysteria started acting up. Jenkins reminded him that he caused the master to miss out on the pill refining time. Continuing on, he explained that the properties of the candidate and the timing of the refining affect the quality of the pills, and it can't be off even by the slightest detail. Afterward, he stormed off quickly. Huoling was still in a daze. He thought the situation with Bai had been settled already. A short while later we saw him inside the material room. All the medicinal paste workers had gathered at the entrance, dreading the fact that someone had come to take one of them away again. Huoling approached Bai, and he ordered her to follow him. As they made their way to the giant cauldron room, Bai spoke, asking Huoling to deliver a message to her family if he ever made it out of this place. She told him that her parents live at the foot of Niexin Mountain in Liang country, and with tears streaming down her face, she begged Huoing to tell them that their daughter is sad about the fact that she wasn't able to take care of them in their old age. With his back still facing her, Huoing states that he won't be able to help her since her time is running out. Then he pulls out a short blade asking Bai to do it herself. Inside the giant cauldron room, the master was busy mashing away with the giant mortar and pestle. Huoing walked in, dragging Bai along by her arm. He announced to the master that he had brought the candidate. The master stopped his mashing and he faced Huoing. For his good work, he praised him, and using his martial powers he brought Bai to him. However, before throwing her into the mortar and pestle, he noticed blood dripping down her leg. Disappointed, he asked Bai if she had fallen and scraped her ankle, but before she could respond he exclaimed that the candidate won't be suitable now. He threw her beside Huoing, and he asked him to bring her back to the material room. Huoing bowed his hand and accepted his new task. At this moment Huoing couldn't help but grin. The first step of his plan was complete. Now he just needed a way to get Bai out of there. Before he left to take Bai back to the material room, the master asked him to wait. Since this candidate wouldn't work, he asked Huoing to bring another one from the material room, and he just remembered that there was another candidate with white hair. He ordered Huoing to hurry and bring the second candidate. The scene then shifts to the material room, and we see the second candidate, an old man kneeling in front of Huoing and asking him to spare his life. However, Huoing knew he couldn't save the second candidate. There's no way the same trick would work twice, so he brought him back to the master. And after arriving, the master immediately tossed the candidate into the mortar and pestle, and he started mashing until the old man was integrated into the contents inside the mortar and pestle. As Huoing looked on, he realized that he hadn't saved Bai, he just extended her life for the moment. As long as the master keeps making pills, he will need candidates, meaning he can't save anyone. The master called Huoing to take a closer look since he was aspiring to walk the alchemy path. With Huoing standing beside him, he exclaimed, "Open the furnace," and the giant cauldron was opened. Then he poured the contents of the mortar and pestle into the cauldron. A short while later the pill was finished. While he held the pill in his hand, the master commented that the other disciples weren't as interested in the path of an immortal like Huoing, so he gave him the pill. Huoing bowed his head and reached forth both hands to accept the pill. There was only one way to save the other candidates as well as himself, which was to kill the master. The master walked past Huoing and patted him on the shoulders, telling him to eat the pill while it was still hot. Huoing quickly ate the pill, and his body temperature started rising rapidly. He felt incredibly hot, and his body was emitting steam. The master ordered him to go back and rest. He explained that the pill is very potent, so it will take some time for his body to fully absorb it. Huoing started to return, and on his way back he used the sides of the cave to help him walk. However, his grip strength suddenly increased, and he crushed a big portion of the wall. He remembered when the second candidate begged for his life to be spared. He felt bad about eating a pill that was made with a human. However, by just taking one pill he could tell that he had gotten considerably stronger. But this much power will mean nothing against the master, who has probably taken countless pills. He didn't know how to go about killing the master. Bai noticed Huoing struggling, and she quickly came over to lend a helping hand. She noticed the look on Huoing's face, and she tried comforting him, saying he shouldn't blame himself because there is nothing he can do against the master. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then watch another one. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.